I can still feel the heat radiating from my cheeks, a burning sensation that had nothing to do with the temperature in the lavish ballroom and everything to do with the venom dripping from my sister's perfectly painted lips. The crystal chandelier above us cast a fractured, icy light over the gathered elite of the city, illuminating the sheer disdain in Tamsin's eyes. We were standing near the center of my parents' extravagant 40th anniversary gala, surrounded by people who measured a person's worth by the zeros in their bank accounts. And Tamsin, glowing in a custom silk gown that cost more than most people's annual salary, leaned in close so only the guests immediately around us could hear her hiss. "You're a pathetic bookworm," she spat, her voice laced with a cruelty that had been brewing since our childhood. "Stop embarrassing us with your thrift store presence. You just sit at home reading pointless books. Meanwhile, I own a $500 million tech firm." The words felt like a physical slap, designed to maximize my humiliation in front of the very society my family worshipped. I just kept my smile. A soft, practiced, infuriatingly calm smile. I said nothing. I let the silence hang in the air, heavy and thick, while my parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, silently agreeing with her. They always did. They saw me as the tragic failure of the family, the quiet head librarian who hid behind dusty shelves while her younger sister conquered the corporate world. But what Tamsin did not know, what none of them knew, was that while they spent years underestimating me, I was busy building an empire that dwarfed their wildest, most arrogant dreams. By tomorrow morning, when the financial papers hit their doorsteps and the truth of my $90 billion shadow empire was revealed, the arrogant smirks would melt off their faces forever. But to understand how we reached this explosive tipping point, how a lifetime of toxic family drama and relentless humiliation forged a razor-sharp weapon out of a quiet girl, we have to rewind. We have to go back to where the final spark was ignited, just a few days before this catastrophic dinner. It was a Tuesday afternoon, raining steadily outside the heavy oak doors of the Central City Library. For me, this place was a sanctuary. The scent of old paper and leather bindings was grounding. I was 36 years old, wearing my usual gray cardigan and sensible flats, shelving a stack of rare historical texts. The quiet hum of the library was suddenly shattered by the sharp, aggressive clacking of stiletto heels striking the marble floor. I did not even need to turn around to know who it was. That heavy, entitled walk belonged to only one person: Tamsin. She strolled into the rare books section, looking like she owned the building, wearing a sharp designer suit and carrying a handbag that could pay off a small mortgage. She paused, eyeing the ancient shelves with theatrical disgust, as if the mere presence of knowledge was offensive to her. "God, it smells like decay in here," Tamsin announced loudly, ignoring the glares from the few patrons seated at the reading tables. She walked over to where I was standing and crossed her arms. "Are you going to be busy wiping dust off forgotten garbage all day, Rowena? Or do you have a minute for the real world?" I placed the final book on the shelf, ensuring its spine was perfectly aligned, before turning to face my 32-year-old sister. "Hello, Tamsin. Please keep your voice down. This is a library." She rolled her eyes, a gesture she had perfected since she was a teenager. "Oh, please. Who even comes here anymore? I just dropped by to remind you about Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner this weekend. Mom is terrified you're going to show up in one of your depressing little sweater vests and ruin the family photos. Try to look decent for once. I have important investors attending." I took a deep breath, maintaining my composed exterior. "I will dress appropriately. You do not need to worry." "I always have to worry when it comes to you," she sneered, leaning closer. "You know, it is genuinely embarrassing explaining what my older sister does for a living. I am closing a deal to acquire Vanguard Tech next week, cementing my status as a tech mogul. And you? You scan barcodes for minimum wage. You are a pathetic bookworm, Rowena. A stain on the family legacy." A few feet away, my assistant librarian, Imogen, accidentally knocked a stack of return cards off the desk. She scrambled to pick them up, looking flushed and clumsy in her oversized glasses and plain brown dress. Tamsin shot Imogen a look of pure revulsion. "And your coworkers are just as tragic," she muttered. I kept my gaze fixed on Tamsin. If only my sister knew the truth. Imogen was not just an awkward assistant. Behind those thick framed glasses was a former Wall Street shark, a ruthless negotiator who currently served as the chief operating officer of Oakhaven Capital, my shadow firm. And right at this very moment, while fumbling with those cards, Imogen was subtly checking her smartwatch to confirm a multi-million-dollar wire transfer we had initiated an hour ago. I am perfectly content with my life, I replied calmly. Books offer a perspective you rarely find in boardrooms. Tamsin let out a harsh, barking laugh. Keep telling yourself that to sleep at night, sis. Just do not embarrass me on Saturday. I have actual important things going on. She spun around and marched out, her red-bottomed heels echoing like gunshots across the marble. I watched her go, feeling the familiar tight knot in my chest. Once she was out of sight, Imogen stood up, pushing her glasses up her nose. Her clumsy demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. The Tokyo funds have cleared, Rowena, Imogen said, her voice dropping an octave into its natural, authoritative tone. I nodded slowly, turning my back to the main floor and walking toward my private office in the back. Good. Let her have her fun, Imogen. I stepped into my small, unassuming office, locked the door behind me, and pressed a hidden panel under my desk. The bookshelf behind me slid open with a soft mechanical hum, revealing a hidden secure room bathed in the blue light of 6 massive monitors. This was the real heart of my world. The nerve center of a financial titan that manipulated global markets. I sat down in the leather chair, looking at the blinking cursors and climbing stock tickers. Tamsin had no idea. She thought her little startup was a giant, but she was merely playing in a sandbox I could pave over without a second thought. But Tamsin did not know that the money she bragged about was merely the interest I earned before my morning coffee. I stared at the screen, a cold determination settling over me. The disrespect was not new. It was merely the latest drop in a very old, very bitter ocean. Sitting in the glow of my monitors, my mind inevitably drifted back through the years. The anger I felt toward my family was not born overnight. It was a slow, agonizing accumulation of slights, betrayals, and blatant favoritism that had shaped my entire existence. If my mind were a museum, it would be filled with exhibits of pain, each one a testament to the toxic environment Alistair and Cordelia, our parents, had cultivated. Exhibit A in my mental museum was my 18th birthday. It was supposed to be a milestone, a day of celebration and transitioning into adulthood. I had spent weeks looking forward to a small, quiet dinner with my family at a nice Italian restaurant downtown. I had even bought a new dress with money I saved from tutoring. But the morning of the dinner, Tamsin, who was 14 at the time, woke up and declared she had a slight scratch in her throat. She sneezed twice. That was it. Just 2 tiny sneezes. My mother, Cordelia, immediately went into a state of panic. She canceled my dinner reservation, claiming they could not possibly leave Tamsin alone when she was so severely ill. Instead of a birthday celebration, I spent the evening fetching ginger ale and fluffing pillows for a girl who spent the entire time giggling on her phone with her friends. When I finally went down to the kitchen at midnight, I found my small birthday cake sitting on the counter, the frosting melted and sagging. Nobody had even bothered to light a candle. I ate a slice in the dark, the sweet vanilla tasting like ash in my mouth. Exhibit B was far more devastating. It was the theft of my future. My grandfather had set up a college fund for both of us before he passed away. I had worked incredibly hard in high school, earning top grades to get into a prestigious university. I knew the fund would not cover everything, but it was supposed to be my safety net. During my senior year, right before tuition was due, I checked the account balance. It was empty. I confronted my father, Alistair, in his opulent study, my hands shaking with a mix of fear and rage. He did not even look up from his newspaper. "Oh, right," he said casually, as if brushing a piece of lint off his jacket. Tamsin needed a car. She was feeling very insecure about taking the bus to her private academy, Rowena. The other girls were teasing her. "We used your fund to buy her a Porsche. You're smart, you can just get a scholarship or take out loans. Tamsin needs the confidence boost right now. A shiny red Porsche." My entire educational foundation, the money meant to secure my future, was traded for a teenager's luxury sports car. I had to scramble. I took on 3 part-time jobs. I scrubbed toilets in dormitories, wiped down greasy diner tables at 3 in the morning, and shelved books in the campus library just to afford my textbooks and rent. I lived on instant noodles and tap water. Meanwhile, that same summer, my parents took Tamsin on a luxurious 6-week vacation to Monaco. I remember scrubbing a stranger's filth off a bathroom tile while looking at a social media post of my sister sipping champagne on a yacht, the caption reading, "Living my best life with the best parents." If you are listening to this right now, I want you to ask yourself a question. If you were in my shoes, would you have cut ties with them right then and there? Would you have screamed, packed your bags, and never looked back? Let me know down in the comments. Because sometimes I wonder if I was crazy for staying. But I did not leave. I chose to remain silent. I chose to build a weapon instead of throwing a tantrum. And then there was Exhibit C. The most cruel memory of all, highlighting not just my parents' neglect, but Tamsin's active malice. It was during my freshman year of college. I had spent 4 agonizing weeks writing an essay for a massive literature scholarship. It was my only hope of paying for the next semester without having to work a 4th job. I printed the final draft and left it on the kitchen island while I went to the bathroom. When I came back, the papers were gone. I panicked, tearing the kitchen apart. Then I heard a crackling sound from the living room. I ran in to find Tamsin standing by the lit fireplace, holding the last page of my essay. She tossed it into the flames, watching it curl and turn black. "What did you do?" I screamed, lunging forward, but it was too late. The ashes fluttered up the chimney. Tamsin just smirked, a look of pure, unadulterated evil on her young face. Oops. I thought it was trash. It certainly read like trash. You really think someone like you deserves to win anything? You're just a boring, plain nobody, Rowena. Stop trying to act special. When my parents rushed in, reacting to my screams, Tamsin immediately burst into fake tears, claiming I was yelling at her for no reason and that the papers accidentally fell into the fire. My mother held Tamsin, glaring at me. "Rowena, stop bullying your sister. It was an accident. You can just write it again. Stop being so dramatic." I did not write it again. The deadline was the next morning. I lost the scholarship. I had to drop 2 classes that semester because I could not afford them. That was the day the last shred of familial love I had for them withered and died. I realized my sister was not just a spoiled brat, she was a predator who thrived on my misery. And my parents were her willing enforcers. Sitting in my high-tech command center years later, the memories felt as fresh as if they had happened yesterday. I looked at the glowing numbers on my screens. The Oakhaven Capital Portfolio. Billions of dollars moving invisibly across the globe, guided by the strategies I formulated in the shadows. They had tried to break me, to keep me small and insignificant. Instead, the pressure they applied had turned me into a diamond. Cold, hard, and capable of cutting glass. I took a deep breath, pushing the ghosts of the past away. I had a war to win, and nostalgia was a useless distraction. The steady rhythm of the rain hitting the library windows was soothing, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I had just finished reviewing a complex merger document from our European division when my personal cell phone buzzed. It was not my encrypted line. It was the cheap, older model phone I kept strictly for family communications. I glanced at the screen. Cordelia. My mother. I let it ring 3 times before answering, schooling my voice into the meek, submissive tone they expected from me. "Hello, Mother." "Rowena." "Finally. Do you ever keep your phone on you?" Her voice grated through the speaker, carrying that familiar undertone of perpetual disappointment. I was working in the archives. It is hard to get a signal down there. "How are you?" "I do not have time for small talk, Rowena," she snapped. "I am calling about the apartment. The one on Elm Street." My stomach tightened. The Elm Street apartment was a tiny, run-down studio in a less than desirable part of the city. It was the only thing my grandfather had managed to leave directly to me in his will, bypassing my parents' control. It was dilapidated, with peeling wallpaper and leaky pipes, but to them, It was where I lived. It was the physical manifestation of my supposed failure in life. What about it, Mother? I asked cautiously. Tamsin needs it, she declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. Her new marketing director is relocating from San Francisco, and the housing market is simply dreadful right now. Tamsin promised him a place to stay while he looks for a house. You need to pack your things and move out by Friday. I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles turning white. Mother, that is my apartment. My name is on the deed. Grandpa left it to me. Where am I supposed to go on 3 days' notice? Oh, stop being so dramatic, Rowena, she sighed heavily, the sound full of exasperation. You're just a librarian. You can rent a cheap room somewhere or sleep on a friend's couch. It does not matter where you are. But your sister is doing big things. She is running a $500 million company. She needs this to secure top talent. Be a good sister for once in your life and support her instead of being so fiercely selfish. Fiercely selfish. The words echoed in my ear. They had taken my college fund, my childhood, my dignity, and now they wanted to take the one tiny, pitiful scrap of property they thought I possessed, just to make Tamsin's life a fraction of a % easier. The sheer, blinding audacity of it was staggering. Their logic was completely warped by their golden child syndrome. Tamsin was everything. I was nothing. I closed my eyes, a cold, dark fury expanding in my chest. A normal person would have screamed. A normal person would have threatened to sue, to call the police, to burn the bridge right then and there. But I was not normal anymore. I was a tactician. And this was the final piece of evidence I needed to justify what I was about to do to them. Fine, I said, my voice shockingly steady. I will have my things out by Friday. Tell Tamsin she can have the keys. Good. See? Was that so hard? I will see you at the anniversary dinner. Try to buy a dress that does not look like it came from a discount bin. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone, placing it on the desk. I did not cry. I did not throw anything. I simply stood up, walked out of my hidden office, and told Imogen I was taking the rest of the afternoon off. I drove through the city, but I did not head toward the Elm Street apartment. That place was nothing but a decoy. A mail drop. A set piece in the elaborate play I had been directing for years. Instead, I drove to the most exclusive, heavily guarded residential tower in the financial district. The concierge nodded respectfully as I passed, and the private elevator whisked me up to the top floor. I stepped into my actual home. A breathtaking, $30 million penthouse that spanned the entire roof of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the skyline, the clouds rolling over the skyscrapers like a stormy sea. Original artwork hung on the walls, and a grand piano sat in the corner of the expansive living room. The silence here was different from the library. It was the silence of absolute, untouchable power. I walked over to the glass wall and looked down at the sprawling city below. Tiny cars moved like ants in the streets. Somewhere down there, my mother was probably congratulating Tamsin on successfully bullying me out of my home. They thought they had just taken my last brick, rendering me completely homeless and broken. They had no idea I owned the entire kingdom. They wanted to play games with real estate and power? Fine. I pulled out my encrypted phone and dialed a number I rarely used. It belonged to a shell company I controlled, one that specialized in aggressive debt acquisition. Yes, Ms. Vance, a sharp voice answered. Look into a startup called Tamsin Tech, I ordered, staring at my reflection in the glass. I want to know who holds their primary debt. Buy it. All of it. Pay whatever premium is necessary, but do it quietly. I want their financial leash resting firmly in my hand by the end of the week. Understood. It will be done. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto a velvet sofa. They had pushed me out of a dump to make room for a marketing director. Little did they know, I was about to evict my sister from her own reality. The last straw had snapped, and there was no turning back. Friday evening arrived, bringing with it the dreaded pre-anniversary family dinner. This was a smaller, more intimate gathering of the extended family before the massive gala on Saturday. It was held at my parents' sprawling estate in the wealthy suburbs, a massive stone mansion that always felt more like a fortress than a home. I arrived exactly on time, parking my unassuming, 10-year-old Honda Civic between a gleaming Bentley and a brand-new Mercedes SUV. I stepped out, smoothing down my simple navy blue dress. It was modest, understated, and exactly what they expected the family disappointment to wear. The moment I walked through the heavy oak doors, the scent of roasted duck and expensive wine hit me. The foyer was buzzing with aunts, uncles, and cousins, all holding crystal glasses and laughing too loudly. I navigated through the crowd, offering polite nods, until a sharp voice cut through the chatter. Well, look who finally crawled out of the archives. It was Aunt Eudora, my father's sister. She was a sour woman draped in heavy gold jewelry, acting as the unofficial leader of Tamsin's flying monkeys. She looked me up and down with an expression of exaggerated pity. "Rowena, dear. Still wearing that dreary blue thing? Did you buy that at a thrift store? You know, if you are struggling to make ends meet, your father could always give you a small loan. It is just so embarrassing seeing you look like the help at a family function." Several cousins snickered. I felt a familiar flash of irritation, but I smothered it instantly. "It is good to see you too, Aunt Eudora. And no, I am quite comfortable, thank you." Before she could launch another insult, the dining room doors opened, and Cordelia ushered everyone in. The long mahogany table was set with priceless antique china and towering floral arrangements. As usual, I was seated at the far end, near the kitchen doors, sandwiched between a deaf great-uncle and a cousin who spent the entire time texting. Tamsin, naturally, was seated at the center of the table, directly across from our parents, glowing in the spotlight. Halfway through the main course, Tamsin stood up, tapping her silver fork against her crystal wine glass. The room immediately fell silent. Everyone turned to look at the golden child. "Thank you, everyone," Tamsin began, offering a blinding, practiced smile. "We're here to celebrate Mom and Dad, of course. But since we are all family, I wanted to share some incredible news. My company has officially entered the final stages of a massive acquisition. Next week, Tamsin Tech will be purchasing Vanguard Tech." A collective gasp echoed around the table. Vanguard Tech was a cornerstone in the artificial intelligence sector, a highly coveted prize. "Oh, darling, that is magnificent." Cordelia beamed, clapping her hands together. Alistair raised his glass in a proud toast. "Vanguard is a major player," my father rumbled. "That acquisition will push your valuation over the billion-dollar mark, Tamsin. You are truly carrying the family legacy into the modern era." Tamsin soaked up the praise like a sponge. "Yes, well, it takes vision and ruthless execution. Things you cannot learn sitting around reading dusty poetry." She shot a pointed, mocking look down the table directly at me. The rest of the family followed her gaze, their eyes filled with amusement and superiority. "Speaking of which, Rowena," Tamsin continued, her voice dripping with condescension, "my glass is empty. Be a dear and fetch that bottle of Cabernet from the sideboard. You are closer to it, and heaven knows you need the practice serving people." The room went dead silent. It was a blatant, unapologetic power play. She was treating me like the hired help in front of our entire family. My father looked away, pretending not to notice. My mother took a delicate sip of water, her silence speaking volumes. They were allowing this. They were endorsing this humiliation. I looked at the bottle of Cabernet on the sideboard. I could feel the eyes burning into me, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to either cry or yell so they could call me unstable. Instead, I stood up slowly, my face a mask of serene indifference. I walked over, picked up the heavy glass bottle, and moved to Tamsin's side. I poured the dark red liquid into her glass with perfectly steady hands, not spilling a single drop. "Congratulations on Vanguard, Tamsin," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "I am sure the paperwork will be very interesting." She sneered, snatching the glass from my hand. "It is a done deal, Rowena. But I would not expect a librarian to understand high-level corporate mergers." I returned to my seat, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The irony of the situation was almost intoxicating. Tamsin was boasting to a room full of people about buying Vanguard Tech. But what she did not know, what her army of expensive lawyers had somehow missed, was that Vanguard Tech's primary funding came from a massive venture capital firm. A firm called Oakhaven Capital. My firm. She thought she was reeling in a massive fish. She had no idea she was swimming directly into the jaws of a leviathan. I took a slow bite of my dinner, chewing thoughtfully. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for her to step on the trigger. The evening dragged on, moving from the dining room to the grand parlor for coffee and gifts. This was the traditional part of the pre-anniversary gathering where the children presented their intimate presents to the parents before the public spectacle the next night. Tamsin went first, naturally. She had two men from the catering staff haul in a massive, velvet-covered object. With a dramatic flourish, she pulled the fabric away to reveal a stunning, original oil painting of a coastal landscape. It is an authentic 19th century piece, Tamsin boasted loudly, ensuring everyone heard the price tag implied in her tone. I had it imported from a private gallery in Florence. I know how much Mom loves the Italian coast. Happy anniversary. Cordelia gasped, rushing forward to trace the ornate gold frame. Oh, Tamsin. It is breathtaking. It is the most thoughtful, exquisite gift. You are far too generous. My father patted Tamsin heavily on the shoulder, his chest puffed out with pride. It was nothing, Dad. Only the best for you too, Tamsin preened, glancing sideways at me. So, Rowena, what did you manage to scrape together on a librarian's salary? A handmade bookmark? A coupon for a free hug? The sycophants in the room chuckled. I stood up, picking up a small, meticulously wrapped rectangular package from the side table. I walked over and handed it to my father. He took it with a look of mild apprehension, as if expecting it to bite him. He tore away the paper to reveal a book. It was a very specific book. A first edition, beautifully preserved copy of The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. It was not just any book, it was the exact edition my father had mentioned wanting to find when I was 10 years old, a memory I had held onto for decades. I had spent months tracking it down through my network of antiquarian dealers. It cost a small fortune, paid for from my secret accounts, though to the untrained eye, it just looked like an old, worn-out book. A book, Alistair said flatly, turning it over in his hands. He did not look at the publication date or the condition. He just saw an old, brown leather cover. Thank you, Rowena. Very practical. Oh, for heaven's sake, Tamsin groaned, walking over and snatching the book from our father's hands. You gave them a used book? Seriously, Rowena? Could you be any more pathetic and cheap? Tamsin, give that back, I said, my voice sharpening slightly. It is a rare first edition. It is very delicate. Delicate. Tamsin mocked, holding it up by one cover, letting the heavy pages dangle precariously. It is garbage. It smells like an old basement. You bring this literal trash into our home and expect them to be grateful. Before I could reach her, before I could stop the malice flashing in her eyes, Tamsin intentionally jerked her hand. The fragile, centuries-old binding gave way with a sickening, tearing sound. She ripped an entire section of pages right out of the spine, tossing the ruined cover onto the coffee table and letting the loose pages flutter to the floor like dead leaves. Silence descended on the parlor. I stood frozen, staring at the destroyed artifact on the rug. The disrespect was one thing. The emotional abuse was another. But destroying something beautiful, something I had painstakingly procured, simply out of spite? That was a violation on a completely different level. Oops, Tamsin said, not sounding sorry in the least. I guess it was a little too old. Good thing it was just cheap trash, right? I looked at my parents. I waited for the reprimand. I waited for Alistair to scold her for destroying a gift, for Cordelia to show even an ounce of shock. But Alistair just sighed and rubbed his temples. Really, Rowena, you should have known better than to bring something so fragile and dusty into the house, my father grumbled, stepping over the torn pages to admire Tamsin's painting again. Tamsin just has a strong grip. Do not make a scene about it. Do not make a scene? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. The blood roared in my ears, drowning out the classical music playing softly in the background. She destroyed it on purpose. She ripped it apart just to hurt me. Oh, grow up, Rowena. Cordelia snapped, glaring at me with genuine hostility. Always playing the victim. Your sister buys us a masterpiece, and you bring garbage, and now you want to ruin the evening by whining about some torn paper? This is exactly why you do not fit in. You are so fiercely bitter about Tamsin's success. I looked at the three of them. My father, ignoring me. My mother, actively despising me. And Tamsin, standing there with a triumphant, wicked smirk on her face, reveling in her untouchable status. Something inside me clicked. A heavy iron door slamming shut in my mind. The last tiny flicker of hope that I could ever earn their love or respect was extinguished, replaced by a cold, calculating void. They loved the golden child. They worshipped money and power. They thought I was weak because I chose silence. I looked down at the torn pages. What they did not know was that the book on the floor was a clever forgery. A high-quality replica I had brought specifically because a part of me, the analytical part that ran a $90 billion empire, had calculated the probability of Tamsin doing something exactly like this. The real first edition was safe in a climate-controlled vault at my penthouse. But their reaction to the destruction? That was real. Their defense of her cruelty? That was real. I smiled. It was a terrifying, hollow smile, but they were too blind to see the danger in it. You are right, Mother, I said softly, smoothing my dress. It was just paper. Please, enjoy your evening. I will see you all tomorrow at the gala. I turned and walked out of the parlor, my spine perfectly straight. I did not look back. I got into my cheap Honda and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles cracked. The time for hiding was over. The time for observing was over. It was time to go to war. If you are watching this, do not look away. Because the vengeance of a patient person is a terrible thing to witness. I did not drive back to the penthouse. I drove straight through the rain-slicked streets to the Central City Library. It was past midnight, and the massive stone building loomed in the darkness like a Gothic fortress. I used my master key card to bypass the security gates and walked through the dark, silent halls, my footsteps echoing against the marble. I reached my office, locked the door, and activated the biometric scanner hidden behind a portrait of George Washington. The bookshelf slid away. The command center was waiting, humming with quiet energy. But I was not alone this time. Sitting in the secondary chair, illuminated by the glow of the monitors, was Imogen. She had ditched the frumpy cardigan and thick glasses. She wore a sharp, tailored black blazer, her hair pulled back tightly, looking every inch the ruthless Wall Street operator she truly was. She held a tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. I saw the alert that you accessed the building, boss, Imogen said, not looking up. You rarely come here at midnight unless something has gone critically wrong. Nothing is wrong, Imogen, I said, walking over to the main terminal and sitting down. In fact, everything is exactly right. It is time. Imogen finally looked up, her eyes narrowing. She had been with me for 8 years, helping me build Oakhaven Capital from a small, aggressive hedge fund into a global behemoth. She knew my family history. She knew exactly what "it is time" meant. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. We are moving on, Vanguard, she asked, her voice thrumming with anticipation. Not just moving on them, I said, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I want a total, hostile, scorch-the-earth takeover. Tamsin thinks she has a deal locked in with them. I want to buy the ground right out from under her feet. Call Tokyo. Call London. Wake up the legal team in New York. Imogen spun her chair around, slapping an earpiece into her ear. The room transformed from a quiet hideaway into a frantic war room. Over the next 3 hours, I unleashed the full, terrifying financial weight of $90 billion. Tamsin's acquisition plan for Vanguard Tech relied on leveraged buyouts and fragile alliances with a handful of mid-tier banks. It was a house of cards. I instructed Imogen to reach out directly to Vanguard's board of directors with an offer they could not refuse. An all-cash buyout, 20% above market value, effective immediately upon signing. Furthermore, I activated the debt we had quietly purchased earlier in the week, Tamsin Tech's debt. The London board is awake, Rowena, Imogen reported, her voice sharp and rapid. They are looking at the offer. Vanguard CEO is hesitant because of the verbal agreement with Tamsin Tech. Tell him verbal agreements are dust, I commanded, staring at the climbing data on my screen. Tell him if he signs with Tamsin, Oakhaven Capital will aggressively short Vanguard stock at the opening bell on Monday and crush his market cap by 30% before lunch. We buy them now or we bury them tomorrow. Make it clear. Imogen relayed the threat, her tone dripping with corporate menace. I leaned back in my chair, watching the clock tick closer to dawn. My sister wanted to play the ruthless CEO? She was a child playing dress-up in a hurricane. I was the storm. At 4 a.m, the notification chimed on my primary screen. The digital signatures from Vanguard's board were verified. The transfer of funds was initiated. We have it, Imogen breathed, leaning back and rubbing her eyes. Vanguard Tech is officially a subsidiary of Oakhaven Capital. Tamsin's deal is dead in the water. She is absolutely nothing. Oh, she is worse than nothing, I murmured, pulling up the debt portfolio. By Monday, when the acquisition fails, her investors will panic. And when they look at Tamsin Tech's balance sheets, they will see that the massive loans keeping her company afloat have been bought out by a holding company called Ironwood LLC. Which we own, Imogen grinned. Which we own. We hold her throat in our hands, Imogen. And tomorrow night, at the anniversary gala, in front of the entire city's elite, I am going to squeeze. I stood up, feeling a strange, hollow sense of calm. The girl who had her college funds stolen, the girl who scrubbed toilets, the girl who watched her hard work burn in a fireplace, she was gone. Only the architect of Oakhaven remained. Prepare the press release, I told Imogen, grabbing my coat. Schedule it to hit all major financial networks at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow evening. Right in the middle of my parents' gala. Ensure my name and face are front and center as the sole founder and CEO. It will be a bloodbath, Imogen said softly, admiring the sheer scale of the ambush. I know, I replied, walking toward the hidden exit. Tamsin wanted a war. I am bringing her the apocalypse. Come on band de Theodoi Dende. New band de Zem het hoi tu. Hey Benluan I'm Win Suang Phia Dune. De la ky hubi mat qua en hung con jia chan chin. Toi esi the tim vatra loi moi Benluan ko tu qua, I'm Win. Got. Hey chuan by tin then cho mot con dia chan tuk suo fan tip theo. The evening of the 40th anniversary gala arrived with a suffocating blanket of humidity over the city, but inside the grand ballroom of the Sapphire Estate, the air was crisp, chilled to perfection, and smelling of expensive orchids and old money. I pulled up to the sweeping circular driveway in my 10-year-old Honda Civic. The engine sputtered slightly as I shifted into park. Ahead of me was a line of gleaming Rolls-Royces, Ferraris, and sleek black SUVs. The valet, a young man in a crisp white uniform, blinked in confusion as I stepped out, handing him the keys to a car that was probably worth less than the tires on the vehicle behind it. I offered him a polite smile, a $20 bill, and walked up the marble steps. I was wearing a dress I had specifically selected from my private collection for this very occasion. It was a vintage haute couture gown from a legendary Parisian designer, an archival piece that had cost me nearly $200,000 at a private auction in Geneva. It was a deep, mesmerizing shade of midnight blue, devoid of any flashy logos, sequins, or ostentatious branding. To the trained eye of a true fashion historian, it was a museum-worthy masterpiece of structural tailoring. To my family, who equated wealth exclusively with giant designer logos and shiny rhinestones, it would look like a slightly outdated, boring rag. It was the perfect armor for a woman they presumed was nothing. Walking into the ballroom was like stepping into a shark tank where all the sharks were wearing tuxedos and diamond necklaces. The room was dripping in excess. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over hundreds of guests. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne and caviar. This was my parents' world, a world built on inheritance, shipping empires, and superficial judgments. As I navigated the edge of the room, sticking close to the shadows, I received the usual treatment. A few pitying glances, a couple of tight-lipped nods, but mostly, I was invisible. I found a quiet spot near a towering floral arrangement and accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. Across the room, holding court like royalty, were my parents, Alistair and Cordelia. They were soaking in the adulation of their peers, laughing loudly at jokes that were not funny. And right beside them, the shining star of the evening, was Tamsin. She was wearing a gown covered in thousands of hand-sewn crystals that caught the light with every move she made. She looked beautiful, entirely radiant, and utterly hollow. At exactly 7:45 in the evening, the string quartet stopped playing. My father tapped a spoon against his crystal glass, the sharp ringing cutting through the chatter. The crowd murmured and turned their attention to the grand staircase, where Tamsin was stepping up to a microphone, a glass of champagne in her hand. "Thank you, everyone," Tamsin began, her voice amplified across the massive room. She possessed a natural charisma, a talent for making everyone in the room feel like she was speaking directly to them. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate 40 years of marriage between two titans of industry, my wonderful parents. They taught me everything I know about ambition, drive, and what it takes to win in this world." The crowd applauded politely. My parents beamed. I checked the antique watch on my wrist. 7:50. 10 minutes until the world ended. But tonight, Tamsin continued, her smile widening into a predatory grin. Tonight is also a celebration of the future. As many of you know, my company, Tamsin Tech, has been aggressively expanding. And I am thrilled to announce to our closest friends and allies that as of Monday morning, we will be finalizing the acquisition of Vanguard Tech. The room erupted into cheers. People raised their glasses. Vanguard was a crown jewel in the tech industry. For a startup CEO to swallow a giant like Vanguard was unheard of. Tamsin raised her hands, soaking in the applause, her ego inflating to fill the massive room. Then, her eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto me, standing quietly in the back in my unbranded blue dress. The wicked glint in her eyes flared. She could not resist. She had the microphone, she had the audience, and she needed a punching bag to elevate herself even further. "It takes a certain type of person to succeed at this level," Tamsin said, her tone shifting, dripping with a venom disguised as playful banter. "It takes vision. It takes courage. It is not for everyone. For instance, my older sister Rowena is here tonight." She gestured toward me. Hundreds of heads turned to stare. The silence that followed was suffocating. "She is a pathetic bookworm. Stop embarrassing us with your poverty, Rowena. You just sit at home reading pointless books. Meanwhile, I own a $500 million tech firm. But we love her anyway, do we not, folks?" A smattering of awkward, condescending laughter rippled through the elite crowd. Cordelia shook her head with a long-suffering sigh, while Alistair looked pointedly at the ceiling. They were letting her humiliate me on a microphone in front of 300 people. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I kept my smile. A soft, knowing, terrifyingly serene smile. I said nothing. I just raised my glass of sparkling water toward her in a silent toast. Tamsin scoffed, clearly disappointed that I had not burst into tears or run out of the room. She turned back to the crowd to continue her victory speech, but the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom suddenly swung open. The man who walked in was a legend in the corporate world. He wore a sharply tailored black suit, his silver hair slicked back, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. It was Sterling, the most feared, ruthless, and brilliant corporate mergers and acquisitions lawyer on the Eastern Seaboard. When Sterling walked into a room, billionaires stopped breathing. He was the Grim Reaper of Wall Street, a man who only appeared when empires were changing hands. And he was walking directly into our family gala. Do you know what it feels like to hold a grenade, knowing you have already pulled the pin, and just watching the people around you admire the shiny metal? That is exactly how I felt in that moment. The clock ticked closer to 8. The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted instantly. The idle chatter died down, replaced by frantic whispers as people recognized the imposing figure striding across the marble floor. Sterling did not look at the floral arrangements. He did not look at the ice sculptures or the waiters. He moved with the precise, mechanical purpose of a guided missile. Up on the grand staircase, Tamsin's face lit up with an expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. She actually gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. In her arrogant, self-obsessed mind, there was only one logical reason the most famous corporate lawyer in the state would crash her parents' anniversary party. He had to be here for her. She had been using a mid-tier law firm to negotiate the Vanguard deal, but she probably assumed Vanguard had sent Sterling himself to personally deliver the finalized contracts as a gesture of ultimate respect. "Oh my God," Tamsin whispered into the microphone, forgetting herself for a second before recovering her confident facade. She practically leaped down the steps, her crystal gown shimmering. She pushed past a group of shipping magnates, extending her hand toward the approaching lawyer. "Mr. Sterling," Tamsin announced loudly, ensuring everyone in the room could hear her. She positioned herself right in the center of the floor, blocking his path. What an incredible honor. I did not expect Vanguard to send their top man, but I appreciate the gesture. I assume you have the final acquisition papers for me to sign? We can go into my father's study right now to finalize the Tamsin Tech merger. Alistair and Cordelia rushed up behind their golden child, their faces flushed with pride. To have Sterling personally deliver a contract to their daughter was the ultimate status symbol. It was a coronation. Sterling stopped. He looked at Tamsin's outstretched hand. He looked at her crystal dress, and then he looked at her face. His expression was entirely blank, devoid of any warmth or recognition. He did not take her hand. "Excuse me," Sterling said, his voice deep and gravelly, carrying easily in the quiet room. "You are in my way." Tamsin's smile froze. Her hand hung in the air, awkwardly suspended. I am Tamsin. Tamsin Vance. The CEO of Tamsin Tech? We are buying Vanguard." "No, Miss Vance," Sterling replied, adjusting his grip on his leather briefcase. "You are not. Now, if you would kindly step aside. I have urgent business with my client, and she does not like to be kept waiting." A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. Tamsin looked as though she had been physically struck. She stumbled back a step, her mind visibly short-circuiting. If Sterling was not here for her, who on earth was he here for? There were billionaires in this room, sure, but Sterling was a man who commanded his own territory. He did not run errands for just anyone. Sterling bypassed the golden child entirely, leaving her standing frozen in the middle of the dance floor. He continued his relentless march across the room. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. I remained standing near the floral arrangement, my back straight, my vintage gown blending into the shadows, holding my glass of sparkling water. Sterling walked straight up to me. He stopped precisely 2 feet away. The entire ballroom held its collective breath, hundreds of eyes fixed on the bizarre scene unfolding. The legendary legal shark and the pathetic, invisible librarian. Then, Sterling did something that made several elderly socialites gasp aloud. He bowed. It was not a polite nod. It was a deep, respectful bow, the kind a loyal soldier gives to a 5-star general. "Good evening, boss," Sterling said, his voice loud enough for the first few rows of guests to hear, the title hanging in the air like a thunderclap. He popped the latches on his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick folder bound in red tape. "I apologize for interrupting the festivities, but as you instructed, we executed the maneuver at exactly the deadline. The transaction is finalized. The ink is dry. Vanguard Tech is yours." I took a slow sip of my water, my eyes locking with Tamsin's across the room. She was staring at me, her mouth slightly open, a look of utter bewilderment contorting her perfect features. "Thank you, Sterling," I said, my voice calm, smooth, and laced with quiet authority. "Were there any complications with the board?" "None, ma'am," Sterling replied, standing tall at my side, acting as a shield against the bewildered crowd. When they saw the sheer volume of capital Oakhaven was willing to deploy, they abandoned their previous verbal agreements instantly. "They send their regards and welcome your leadership." "Rowena?" "It was my father, Alistair." He had pushed his way through the crowd, his face purple with confusion and mounting anger. What is the meaning of this? What is this man talking about? Why is he calling you his boss? Before I could answer, a synchronized, terrifying sound rippled through the grand ballroom. It started as a low hum and quickly escalated into a chaotic symphony. Buzz, buzz, ding, ring. Every single cell phone in the room was going off at the exact same time. Notifications from Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and Forbes. The clock had struck 8. The embargo was lifted. The press release Imogen had prepared was now hitting every major financial network on the globe. People pulled their phones from their tuxedo pockets and jeweled clutches. The glowing screens illuminated their faces in the dim ballroom light. And as they read the breaking news alerts, the confusion morphed into something else entirely. It morphed into sheer, unadulterated shock. I looked at Tamsin. She was staring down at her phone, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the device. The ghost of the library was dead. The Empress of Oakhaven had just arrived. I hope you are ready to see what happens when the truth finally comes to light, because the fallout is going to be spectacular. The silence in the ballroom shattered, replaced by a chaotic crescendo of gasps, whispers, and frantic reading. People were staring at their phones, then staring at me, then looking back at their screens as if their eyes were deceiving them. The transition from invisible outcast to the center of the universe happened in a matter of seconds. It says here, a shipping magnate standing near my father muttered, his voice trembling, reading directly from a Wall Street Journal push notification. Global financial titan Oakhaven Capital executes hostile, all-cash takeover of Vanguard Tech. In a shocking twist, the elusive founder and CEO of the Shadow Empire has been revealed as local librarian Rowena Vance. That is impossible, Cordelia hissed, marching forward and snatching the phone out of the man's hand. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide, reading the headline again and again. This is a prank. Rowena, what kind of sick, twisted joke is this? Did you hire this man to embarrass your sister? This is no joke, Mrs. Vance, Sterling interjected, his voice booming like a judge handing down a sentence. He turned to face the crowd, holding up the Vanguard acquisition documents. My client, Rowena Vance, is the sole founder, majority shareholder, and chief executive officer of Oakhaven Capital, a firm she has built in absolute secrecy over the past 8 years. Tamsin finally found her voice. She pushed through the crowd, her face twisted in a mask of panic and rage. You're lying. She is a librarian. She makes $30,000 a year. Oakhaven is a monster firm. They manage billions. There is no way this plain, boring loser runs Oakhaven. I handed my glass of water to a stunned waiter passing by. I stepped forward, closing the distance between me and my screaming sister. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. When you hold all the power, a whisper is louder than a scream. You are right about one thing, Tamsin, I said, my voice echoing in the dead quiet of the room. Oakhaven does manage billions. But you are vastly underestimating the scale. I nodded to Sterling. He cleared his throat, pulling a secondary document from his briefcase. It was a certified financial summary, stamped by 3 of the largest auditing firms on the planet. As of the market close today, Sterling announced, making sure every syllable landed like a brick, following the acquisition of Vanguard Tech and the liquidation of several offshore tech portfolios, Oakhaven Capital's total assets under management, directly controlled by Miss Vance, are valued at $90 billion. $90 billion. The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. You could actually see the blood drain from people's faces. To put it in perspective, my parents' shipping company, a generational wealth engine they lorded over everyone, was worth maybe $2 billion on a good day. Tamsin's heavily leveraged startup was valued at $500 million. I was not just richer than them. I was richer than all of them combined. I possessed the kind of wealth that could buy governments, rewrite laws, and erase legacies. And I had been sitting at the end of their dinner table, wearing clothes they mocked, pouring their wine, and listening to them call me a failure. Tamsin turned pale. Ash white. Her jaw slackened, and her eyes darted wildly around the room, looking for someone, anyone, to tell her this was a nightmare. She looked at our father. Alistair was leaning heavily against a marble pillar, gripping his chest, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He was staring at me with a mixture of terror and awe, finally realizing that the daughter he discarded had conquered the world while he was busy playing golf. 90 billion. Cordelia whispered, dropping the borrowed phone onto the floor. It shattered, but no one cared. She looked at my vintage dress, suddenly realizing it was not a thrift store rag. She looked at my simple shoes, suddenly realizing they were custom-made. You have had this the whole time? While we were paying for your sister's things. While you were living in that awful Elm Street dump. I have not lived on Elm Street for 6 years, Mother, I replied calmly. That was just a mail drop. A place to keep up the illusion so you would all leave me alone to do my work. I live in the Sky penthouse on Financial Avenue. Aunt Eudora, who had insulted my clothes just a day prior, let out a tiny, high-pitched squeak and essentially tried to hide behind a curtain. The flying monkeys were realizing they had been throwing stones at a sleeping dragon, and the dragon was finally awake. But Vanguard, Tamsin choked out, tears of genuine panic welling in her eyes. Her entire identity was tied to that acquisition. It was her ticket to the billionaire club. I had a deal with them. You stole it. You used your secret money to outbid me just to ruin my night. I did not outbid you to ruin your night, Tamsin, I said softly, tilting my head. I outbid you because it was a sound strategic move for my portfolio. The fact that it ruins your life is just a delightful bonus. You wanted to play in the big leagues. Welcome to the big leagues. The sharks out here do not care about your feelings. I turned to Sterling. Ensure the press gets the full details of the cash transaction. I want the market to know Vanguard is safe under Oakhaven's umbrella. At once, ma'am, Sterling nodded, closing his briefcase. I looked around the ballroom. The music was dead. The party was ruined. The golden child was weeping silently, her crystal dress looking ridiculous against the backdrop of her monumental failure. My parents were broken, staring at the stranger they had created. Happy anniversary, Mother, Father, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth or affection. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. I have a company to run. I turned my back on them and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted, bowing their heads, refusing to make eye contact. They were terrified. As I reached the heavy oak doors, I felt a deep, profound sense of liberation. The invisible chains of family expectation and abuse had been shattered, replaced by the cold, heavy crown of an empire I built with my own 2 hands. But if you think walking out of that party was the end of the revenge, you do not know me at all. Because I had not even dropped the biggest bomb yet. That was reserved for tomorrow morning. Wait! Tamsin's scream tore through the ballroom just as my hand touched the brass handle of the heavy oak door. I paused, letting out a slow breath, before turning around. She was running across the marble floor, no longer caring about elegance or decorum. Her crystal gown swished violently, and tears were streaking her perfect makeup. She stopped a few feet from me, panting, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You cannot do this. Tamsin shrieked, her voice cracking, sounding like the spoiled 14-year-old who used to throw tantrums when she didn't get her way. You cannot just swoop in and steal Vanguard. I promise my investors. My entire board is banking on this merger. If I do not secure Vanguard, my stock is going to tank on Monday morning. You are going to ruin my company. I looked at her, truly looked at her. Beneath the expensive clothes and the arrogant facade, she was just a terrified fraud. She had built her company on our parents' money, on connections she did not earn, and on promises she could not keep. Your company was already ruined, Tamsin, I said, my voice ringing clear and cold across the silent room. You leveraged your assets to the breaking point. You took out massive, high-interest loans from shadow lenders to artificially inflate your valuation. You were playing a dangerous game of financial roulette, and the ball just landed on black. Alistair pushed past a group of shocked guests, stepping to Tamsin's side. He tried to muster his old patriarchal authority, puffing out his chest. Rowena, listen to me. This has gone far enough. You have made your point. You are wealthy. Congratulations. But you are not going to destroy your sister's livelihood. You will cancel this Vanguard nonsense, or you will transfer the acquisition rights to Tamsin Tech. We are family, and we protect our own. The sheer audacity of the statement almost made me laugh. We protect our own. Where was that protection when they drained my college fund for a Porsche? Where was that protection when I was scrubbing floors? Where was that protection when Tamsin ripped my antique book to shreds? You do not give me orders anymore, Alistair, I replied, stripping away the title of father. He flinched as if I had struck him. And as for Tamsin's livelihood, I am afraid the situation is much worse than losing Vanguard. I reached into my small clutch and pulled out a sleek, black envelope. I handed it to Tamsin. She stared at it like it was a venomous snake before snatching it from my hand. She ripped it open, pulling out a single sheet of heavy stock paper. As she read the few lines of text, her knees literally buckled. She dropped the crystal champagne glass she had still been clutching in her other hand. It hit the marble floor, shattering into 100 pieces, a perfect metaphor for her life. No, Tamsin whimpered, falling to her knees among the broken glass. No, no, no. This is a lie. Cordelia rushed forward, kneeling in her expensive gown to pick up the paper. She read it, her face contorting in confusion. Ironwood LLC? What is Ironwood LLC? It says they have acquired all of Tamsin Tech's outstanding debt and are calling in the loans immediately due to breach of covenants. What does this mean, Rowena? It means, I said, looking down at them from my towering height, that Ironwood LLC is a subsidiary of Oakhaven Capital. I own the debt. All of it. Tamsin owes me $300 million, payable immediately. Since she does not have the cash, because she blew it all trying to pretend she was a titan, I now own Tamsin Tech. I own her patents. I own her servers. I own the chair she sits in. A collective gasp echoed from the crowd. I had not just beaten her, I had consumed her entire existence. You are a monster, Cordelia hissed, looking up at me with pure venom, pulling a sobbing Tamsin into her arms. She is your sister. How could you be so utterly cruel? Cruel? I echoed, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. Cruel is watching someone burn your hard work and smiling. Cruel is stealing a child's future for a sports car. I am not cruel, Cordelia. I am just a mirror. I am reflecting your exact behavior back at you, and you are terrified by how ugly it looks. I reached into my clutch one last time and pulled out a solid gold business card. I tossed it lightly, letting it flutter to the floor and land perfectly next to the shattered champagne glass. I also own the holding company that owns this estate, by the way, I added casually, twisting the knife. So you are currently trespassing on my property. But I will let you finish your party. If you want to save your trash company from being liquidated and sold for scrap, Tamsin, you and our parents will be at my penthouse tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock. Do not be late. I turned, the heavy doors opened for me, and I walked out into the humid night air. I left them in ruins, surrounded by their high society friends who now knew the Vance family was nothing but a house of cards waiting for a stiff breeze. I got into my old Honda Civic, started the engine, and drove away from the Sapphire estate for the very last time. My phone was buzzing relentlessly with texts and missed calls from unknown numbers, politicians, and banking executives begging for my attention. I ignored all of them. I rolled the windows down, letting the wind whip through my hair. For the first time in 36 years, I could finally breathe. But the final judgment was yet to come. The execution of their pride was scheduled for the morning. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting long, golden shadows across the polished hardwood floors. I sat in a massive leather armchair at the end of the expansive living room, sipping black coffee. The view from up here was intoxicating. You could see the entire city, a sprawling grid of concrete and glass that felt incredibly small when you held the strings that controlled it. Standing behind my chair, looking like an executioner in a tailored charcoal suit, was Imogen. She was holding a tablet with Tamsin's financial records, ready to deliver the final blow. At precisely 7:55 in the morning, the private elevator chimed. The heavy steel doors slid open, and my family walked in. The contrast between this morning and the previous night was staggering. Gone was the arrogant swagger, the dripping jewels, and the condescending sneers. Alistair looked like he had aged 10 years overnight, his shoulders slumped, wearing a wrinkled suit. Cordelia was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, clutching her expensive handbag like a life preserver. And Tamsin. Tamsin was broken. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, her eyes glued to the floor. They looked like refugees seeking asylum in a palace. They stood awkwardly in the entryway, taking in the sheer magnitude of the penthouse. The original Picasso on the wall. The grand piano. The panoramic view of the financial district. This was a level of wealth they could not even comprehend, let alone achieve. "Sit," I commanded, gesturing to the long, low Italian leather sofa across from me. They moved like nervous sheep, shuffling over and sitting down. Alistair cleared his throat, trying to summon a shred of dignity. "Rowena," he began, his voice raspy. "Your mother and we stayed up all night talking. We realized we have made some misjudgments over the years. We were so caught up in building the family legacy that we neglected you. We always knew you were special, with your books and your quiet intelligence. We are so incredibly proud of what you have built." The sheer hypocrisy of his words was physically nauseating. "We always knew you were special." "Stop," I said, raising a single finger. The silence was immediate. "Do not insult my intelligence, Alistair. You did not know I was special. You thought I was a waste of space. You thought I was a failure because I did not brag loudly enough at dinner parties. You are only proud of the zeros in my bank account. Do not pretend this is about family." Cordelia leaned forward, tears welling in her eyes. "Rowena, please. You have to understand. We were just trying to push you. We wanted you to be tough. You stole my college fund to buy a Porsche." "Cordelia," I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of any anger. Anger was an emotion for the weak. I was dispensing justice. "You let Tamsin destroy my things. You kicked me out of the Elm Street apartment just 3 days ago because Tamsin needed it for an employee. That was not pushing me. That was erasing me." Tamsin let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands. "I am sorry," she wept, the sound muffled by her fingers. "I am so sorry, Rowena. I was jealous. You were always so much smarter than me. You read those massive books, you understood things I could not even grasp. Mom and Dad always expected me to be the star, and I was terrified they would figure out you were the genius. I had to push you down to stay on top. Please, do not take my company. It is all I have. I will go to prison for those shadow loans if you liquidate." It was the first piece of truth she had spoken in her entire life. Her cruelty was born of profound, deep-seated insecurity. She knew she was a fraud, and she punished me because my genuine intelligence threatened her fragile illusion. "I am not going to liquidate your company, Tamsin," I said smoothly. Her head snapped up, a glimmer of desperate hope flashing in her tear-filled eyes. Alistair and Cordelia let out synchronized sighs of relief. They actually thought they had won. They thought the old, submissive Rowena was back, ready to forgive and forget just because they shed a few fake tears. "Thank God," Alistair breathed, wiping his forehead. "I knew you would see reason, Rowena. We can combine our assets. Oakhaven and the family shipping line. We can be a dynasty." I looked at him, a cold smile touching the corners of my lips. "You misunderstand, Alistair. I am not saving her company to help her. I am saving it because Vanguard Tech needs a subdivision for experimental marketing and Tamsin Tech has decent infrastructure. But Tamsin will no longer be the CEO." The hope died in Tamsin's eyes instantly. "What?" "Imogen," I said, nodding to my COO. Imogen stepped forward, handing Tamsin a thick legal document and a pen. "This is a buyout agreement. Oakhaven Capital is purchasing Tamsin Tech, assuming all its debts, and stripping you of all equity, voting rights, and executive privileges. We are buying your life's work, Miss Vance, for the purchase price of exactly $1. Imogen tossed a single, crisp $1 bill onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a soft, mocking flutter. $1. Tamsin whispered, staring at the bill as if it were coated in poison. "Sign the paper, Tamsin," I ordered. "Or I call in the loans, force bankruptcy, and let the federal regulators investigate your fraudulent accounting. You can either be my employee, or you can be a convicted felon. The choice is yours." The penthouse was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Tamsin stared at the $1 bill, her entire identity crumbling to ash. She picked up the pen with trembling fingers. She did not read the contract. There was no point. She signed her name on the dotted line, legally signing away her ego, her status, and her freedom. Imogen efficiently snatched the document away, leaving the single-dollar bill on the table. "What happens to me now?" Tamsin asked, her voice hollow, devoid of life. "Now," I replied, leaning back in my chair, "you work for me. Or rather, you work for Imogen. You are going to be a junior marketing analyst for the new Vanguard subdivision. You will work in a cubicle. You will clock in at 8 in the morning and clock out at 6 in the evening. You will have a manager who will review your work, and if you are disrespectful, you will be fired. You are going to learn what it feels like to actually work for a living instead of playing a CEO on our parents' dime." Tamsin closed her eyes, tears leaking down her cheeks. The golden child had been reduced to a corporate drone in my empire. Alistair stood up, his face flushed with a mixture of humiliation and fury. "This is sick, Rowena. You are enslaving your own sister. You are tearing this family apart." "There was no family to tear apart," I shot back, my voice finally rising, cutting through the room like a steel blade. "There was only a cult of personality centered around her, funded by you, at my expense. And speaking of funding, Alistair, I have reviewed the shipping company's manifests. Your fleet is outdated. You are losing market share to Asian conglomerates. You came here hoping I would bail you out. Hoping my 90 billion would save your dying legacy." Alistair's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Cordelia clutched his arm, looking terrified. "I am not giving you a single cent," I declared, delivering the final verdict. "I will not invest in your company. I will not pay for your country club memberships. I will not buy your luxury cars. From this moment on, you are financially and emotionally cut off. If you call me, my security team will handle it. If you show up at my building, you will be arrested for trespassing. You are going to go back to your fading mansion and watch your money slowly dry up, knowing that the daughter you threw away holds the keys to the world." I stood up. The meeting was over. "Imogen, show them out. And make sure Tamsin gets her new employee handbook. She has orientation on Monday." I turned my back on them and walked toward the massive windows. I heard the muffled sobs of my mother, the heavy, defeated footsteps of my father, and the dragging, hollow shuffle of my sister as Imogen escorted them to the elevator. The doors chimed, closed, and they were gone. I stood there, looking out over the city. They used to mock me for reading. They used to say I was wasting my life hiding in books. But they never understood the ironic truth. The books were my mentors. While they were busy worrying about designer shoes and country club gossip, I was reading Sun Tzu, Machiavelli, and Adam Smith. The library was not my hiding place, it was my war college. I learned patience. I learned strategy. I learned how to read the weaknesses in people and exploit them flawlessly. I did not need a flashy suit or a loud voice to be great. I just needed knowledge, because knowledge, when applied with ruthless precision, is the ultimate power. I took a deep breath. The anger that had lived in my chest for 36 years was gone, replaced by the cool, crisp air of absolute freedom. The invisible girl was dead. The librarian was gone. The architect remained. So, here is my final question to you, the jury of the internet. That is how I handled my toxic, abusive family. I did not just cut them off. I systematically dismantled their pride, stole their crown jewel, and forced my golden child sister to work in a cubicle for minimum wage under my shadow. I took away the only thing they ever truly loved, their illusion of superiority. Did I go too far? Am I the villain in this story for pushing my sister to the absolute brink, or did she get exactly what she deserved after decades of psychological torment? Let me know your verdict down in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Thank you for watching until the very end of the story. If you enjoyed this plot twist, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next explosive Reddit drama stories on our channel. See you in the next video.